Welcome to Nodevember Day 3, where the theme for today is ice. So I spend a couple of hours doing this one, and I start by using a displacement or noise VDB with two noises added together, and this gets me a rough rock shape. So I've never used VDB systems, so I'm just using a displaced icosphere using the built-in Blender 5 displacement. From there, I start thinking about, okay, how do SDF Booleans on the new grid nodes work? So I was trying out like intersection Booleans, mesh to Boolean. It's hard to see a grid without turning it to a mesh. So I got that workflow sorted out, figured out how to do Booleans, and I thought, okay, so my goal here is to create an iceberg. So I needed the ice under the water and at the wave to be eaten away. So I used a normal displacement of one particular mesh, and then I use a subtraction in itself of a cube to subtract its own shape from itself to get kind of this top shape. So from there, I start testing the different noises to bring out kind of a different shape to the top part and bottom part, and also to break up the cutout so that it feels a little bit more organic. So from there, I use the mask nodes. At first I used the built-in new Blender 5 circle mask, but then I think, okay, maybe I could use like a gizmo, and I tried to figure out the maths to get the gizmo right so that I can change the size of the general shape from the bounding box. And then from there, I could use that to kind of like drive the general shape of the look and smoothen the shape of the SDF underneath the water. So from there, I start to get kind of an interesting look from under the water to on top of the water, and I try to figure out different types of noise randomizations based on a seed. So I'm using 40 noise, I think, and I think I use a random seed on the W to bring out the shape, and then I start building the actual controls. So there on the right, I noticed that my Bforartists controls in the geometry nodes are broken, so I resume with that fix later during the day, and I start focusing on the water. So water and EVs, I still haven't mastered it, and I don't know how to do it very well. So I built a basic world shader where I use the camera ray as a mask to separate the light from the background, so I could have a custom gradient in the background, but a different type of fill light from the world, or use custom lighting to bring out the shape. And then I start using a subsurface scattering with some glass, mix that in with some volumetrics into the water. And then I think of some displacement or some subdivision at really high levels to see if I can get some waves using a Voronoi. But my displacement's all off because I was plugging it from the position, and then I put it in from the actual values. So it's starting to look okay, and I start thinking about the actual colors of the mesh, which I use a similar system with two noises over the other onto the displacement to just get a quick animated water. And I'll work on the colors. So from there, I'm using ambient occlusion as a mask. I use also a certain type of pattern that we have included with Bforartists and Simplex noise. I use also triplanar to bring that in, or generated shapes. I mix those two shapes together to kind of get kind of the subtexture of the material, and I use that mixed in with the ambient occlusion to bring out kind of like a frozen water look. I also use another noise texture, bring that in into the roughness and the bump of the actual white snowy bits, or the icy bits, the frosted bits. So this is kind of like a glacial freshwater piece of ice. So from there, I then think about the noise and the displacement as micro displacement onto the system, and I try and invert the normals and mix them in with the bump using the mixed normal map node asset in Bforartists, which uses a nice way of blending, and I invert the masks to do that and tune it to taste, and then from there I test the seed and the growth in the systems. So now what? I look at my references and I think about what to do. So now I'm thinking, okay, well I need a bit more gizmos. I want to do a nice little animation, so I start hooking up the gizmos into different values based on the bounding boxes, but I need to be organized to do it. So then I start thinking, okay, which part do I want to drive? Which part is defined by the position of the bounding boxes? Typically it's good to set your gizmos to a bounding box and use the position of that bounding box to drive, like for example, the height of the mesh. And then you use that value to drive the rest. And then I can like do also the width of the mesh. So from there I got 2 gizmos, and I'm thinking, alright, let's do a radial gizmo for the seed. Made it a bit more sensitive, start grouping things and thinking, what else can I do? So start organizing things with a viewer in the join mesh node. I broke something by accident, which was the mask. I rebuild it. And inside Bforartists, I have the option of offsetting the viewer node or not. You can do that on or off, depending if you want that behavior. So start turning the displacement. The size of the bottom, I use also a normal position offset to make it a bit more exaggerated. And from there, I make it inherit the material from the source mesh. So geometry nodes doesn't pass through materials. So I have a node group called inherit material, where you can inherit the source mesh's material stack and pass it through to the geometry nodes generated mesh. So that's also included as a default. And then from there I start thinking about splitting the water volumetrics in a separate mesh, use the top as like a separate flat plane. Then I use more detail built in with the mask generated from ambient occlusion into the same seed. I pass the seed into a stored attribute and call it into the material so that I can use the randomization to randomize the rotation of the seed. And then inside of Bforartists I also have a slope mask, which I can use for underneath or on top of the ice so that its sky facing is a bit whiter than the rest. I start tuning the subsurface scattering, the color of the subsurface scattering, and lo and behold, it's just like magic, it turned into actually something not too bad. Not too far away from the reference that I had. And then I start playing around, because it's when I get to a point where I'm like, okay, this is really fun. The gizmos, the system just works, the seeds, then I can start animating. So this is where I do that animation part and think about what to do. Since I'm not playing back at real time, I'm also trying to figure out the new footer animation controls of Blender along with the timeline inside of the dope sheet. So the user experience for this is not too good yet. I didn't have, in the timeline, I don't have keyframe snapping, so I take note of that to fix that for Bforartists for later. And then I start tuning in the mask as well into the materials. So I don't want like the fine ice details under the water, so I use the same mask from before to drive the material. And this is the final result. So far, this is one of my favorites of the marathon. So tune in Friday for a live produced Nodevember in the next one. Till then.